the way forward looks like we have a pretty clear picture now after Professor Gumbrich has proposed at least his three key ideas. We can think about it, we can discuss about it. However, before we go into the discuss and then share our knowledge and all those things, as advisory committee of this very conference, I would like to request Professor Jeffrey Ress to share what is in his mind as organizing this conference, and then are we going to go there as he wishes or not, please.
I'll be brief because we have many important things to discuss in limited time. I wanted to share with you my feeling how precious this experience has been to be able to participate in this unusual event. Sometimes one is a bit apprehensive before trying something new, and we weren't sure what was going to happen, but I would have to say from my personal point of view, this event has turned out to exceed my hopes, and I'm very glad that that's happened that way. I should say to start that I come from a different place compared to most people who are here. My professional training is partly in political science and economics and sociology, organization theory, basically human behavior issues, and I also have a parallel career in electronic engineering, so I tend to think about some things quite systematically. I'm going to talk about that now. Reviewing my thoughts upon the meeting, I have things just from my own personal perspective, which, as I say, is quite different probably from many people in the room here. So one thing is just about the mechanics of the presentations. I was very pleased to see some of the presenters stumbling here in their presentations, because it means that they are now being drawn into the world of this interchange. I had some interesting conversations with a couple of these people. But let me just offer a couple of thoughts. I remember the first time I presented a paper at a international meeting, and it was quite an intimidating thing, but I had people help me what to do, and I've probably gotten a little better as the years have gone by. So just let me give you a couple of thoughts about that. We've had quite a variety of methods of presenting things here. Let me tell you some things that kind of work from here that I like to see when I'm in the audience. One is the principle that I try to follow is don't read a paper. And this has something important to do with the responsibilities now of Mr. Pruin and his Prashant, who after the meeting, and you'll see in a moment. Essentially, I think it should be like a conversation with the audience in which you maintain eye contact. And that's because of a proven pedagogical principle that you're able to convey much more information when you're able to emotionally engage across from the platform to the audience. And I think that one should try to present only the high points, the conclusions, and the context of a paper, and maybe limit it to just 4 or 5 important points, and then you tell the audience, okay, for the 5% of you who are interested in what I'm saying here, you may download the paper from the website. Are you hearing that over there? I hope all this is going to be up on the website, because most of the meetings that I attend now, the papers are all up on the website. Some meetings, within minutes, you hand in your thumb drive when you step down from the stage. Sometimes it takes a couple of days, but that's something very valuable. Essentially, that's part of the mechanism of the conversation. And the presentation is just the map to what's in the article. And I think that this is about the graphics. They can be either very useful or they can be distracting. But an important point is to keep them up on the screen long enough so that people can absorb the points. And that really the sort of the ink on the page should be 50% or less. If it's too dense, it's really difficult to get any value out of it. And the other thing is, of course, that you rehearse in front of a mirror with a clock. And that's the way you make sure you don't have these interesting engagements with the master of ceremonies here. And talk slowly. Don't talk as fast as I do. I'm a bad example. Okay, so then a couple of other points. One point that Professor Gombrich just mentioned, the mechanics of an interchange can be essentially a moderated news group. And so the important points there, again, the mechanics, it's got to have a moderator, and that means that the trolls and the people who are trying to cause trouble, you're able to keep them under control. And you have to have a very good administrator to make sure the thing keeps working. And the way these things work, there's software you can get for free. Essentially, when you register, you put up your contact data, and everybody who is accepted then has access to the contact information of the other people, their organization, their phone number, their mobile number, their internet address, email address, and so forth. Okay, so then on to the big points here, and they're really just 2 or 3. So we hoped when we organized this meeting that it would be a conversation among us. It would start a conversation, and this is good, and many wonderful things have come out of this, and I think more are going to come out of it. But the point is that to be of real value, it should be institutionalized, which is to say it acquires a continuing existence. And I'm not going to get into the details of that, but how things, you're going to have to think about where it's going to be, what it's going to be, who's going to run it, what are the communication methods, and so forth. But that's a clear next step. So I'm not going to talk about that because everybody more or less agrees on that. Whether it should be one organization or multiple organizations in different places, I'm not going to, I don't know. I would ask the question, I just put it out, would the name that you propose cause a reluctance for among some people to engage? There are other Buddhist communities which are not Ambedkar Buddhists here in India. And, okay, so, okay, well, so should there be some other, even more overarching organization? I don't know. These are just things we put out to you anyway. Okay, so that's one thing. So there's a kind of a commitment to institutionalization. Now, there's an important point about every successful effort in the world, which is that anything which is a resounding success always needs a champion. And the Buddha was your first champion. Dr. Ambedkar was another champion. Your parents were your personal champions. Sometimes champions stand up on their own and decide to be champions. Sometimes they're called. There's an interesting story if you read in the Hebrew book of Exodus about Moses, who runs into some trouble in Egypt, and he goes to Mount Sinai, and he sees a burning bush, and he has a conversation with God, and God says, I shall send thee unto Egypt to bring my people out of slavery. And Moses says, well, do you want me to go to see Pharaoh? You know, who am I to go to see Pharaoh? And so God says to him, well, I'll be there with you. So even though organizations have to have a champion to make them successful and durable, it takes a lot of people to support the champion. Okay, so who are champions and how do you find them and how do you build them up? So an organization doesn't survive because it has a good administrative office, or that's not enough. So a champion is not a manager. I think that's something we should be very clear about. And so usually these people are quite active. Often they're hyperactive. They have very good human relations skills. They usually have a smile on their faces. People like to be around them. They're adventurous people. They are very self-confident. Napoleon was very self-confident. And as I say, sometimes they're self-selected, and sometimes people, you can find somebody you think has potential. I mean, Moses basically had potential, but he didn't see it in himself, and he got some encouragement from the spirit inside the burning bush. So, so anyway, this is an important consideration. If you're thinking about doing this thing, you have to think who is going to be the champion or champions to make it work. It can't just be having a good back office. Okay, so then the last thing I want to say is that to build a durable organization, it's got to be robust in its activities, and it's got to last a long time. And it's we're really looking at two things here. I mean, we're looking at this organization, which Professor Gombrich has outlined to you, but we are also looking at a bigger issue, which is the development of robust and durable Buddhist communities in India. And we heard some sad stories about what's happening in Bihar and some other places. Things don't always work out. So what does it take to make a robust and durable organization? Okay, so in my life, I've thought about this in the context of a particular problem. I'm going to spend 3 minutes telling you about it. If anybody's interested, you can email me and I will send you the article where it's summarized. I was looking at another problem, which is the issue which also has some relevance in India, about anti-corruption. So a lot of people are very concerned about corruption. There are big international conferences. There's a lot of money invested in anti-corruption. There are conferences, there are research grants, there are travel grants, there are all kinds of things. It's a big industry, anti-corruption. But I've been involved in this for a long time. And I noticed that the places that the people who are against corruption become very active, usually they just go on being just as corrupt as they were before, sometimes more corrupt. And I thought that was an interesting question. Why is that so? Why do these things fail? Okay, so turns out there's a very good reason why these anti-corruption programs almost always fail. And it's an engineering problem, it's in the paper that I described, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. So I said, let us look at some things where you were able to bring about very major behavioral changes, which is what you're talking about in changing a community of corrupt officials and people. Because officials can't be corrupt unless the public tolerates it. That's a very important point. How do you change that kind of behavior? So let's look at the generic problem of how do you change human behavior significantly and make it last. And I said, let's look at 3 cases where this has been done historically. And so the 3 that I took were Lycurgus, who was actually the king of Sparta. And he wanted to do something for his people who were sort of poor and weak, and he said, I want to make them into a great power. And he stepped down as king, and he developed a program which made Sparta the greatest military power in that part of the world for 500 years. So it was a dramatic, robust change, and it was durable. It survived the initiator of the change. And so I listed what the factors were in his ability to do that. And then look at another case, which is Muhammad, who was considered by many people to be some crazy man who heard voices, and even had to flee his home. He went to, where did he go, Ethiopia or someplace like that, I think. But he was able to develop a powerful movement out of a group of drunken pagans, that's the way he saw them, who were basically useless people who couldn't do much except fight and kill each other. And he made a powerful movement, which then became a powerful state, which then became a powerful empire, which 1400 years later is still very powerful. Okay, so that was a second example, and I extracted some commonalities with the case of Lycurgus about why that happened. And then I looked at the case of Singapore, where the dominant figure was Lee Kuan Yew. And I was in Singapore in the 60s, and it was just sort of a dirty, corrupt city, and it's not like that anymore. And you can't even buy chewing gum there now because somebody might stick it under the tables in the restaurants. Okay, so it's a dramatic change. And all of these things took 30 years, and they all share certain common principles. And so I'm thinking maybe if you want to make the kinds of robust change, whether on this level of this little organization that you may create, which should last a long time, or in terms of being able to make religious communities vibrant the way Mohammed did out of nothing, I say drunken pagans, then some people might want to look at the paper and it can be passed, or you can send me an email. Eventually it's going to be part of a book, and if anybody has any comments, I'd welcome that. So those are my thoughts for you today. I just think this was a thrilling experience, and I've learned a tremendous amount from these 3 days, and I'm sure many others here have also. Thank you so much.